All right, let's look at some of the ethical relationships. And I use this analogy of a building block because that's how I experience and see ethics viscerally. But so there's obviously an element of mathematics, an element of rationality. And as context for this, I made a much broader video, which I'm putting on my MAPS series, because it just astounds me how many useful subjects and things that I think we all really need to know as guides in reality, that one can go through the entire cultural system, from parenting to school to college to work, that without any formal training in ethics. So this is the ethical map that I see for the relationships around this abuse cycle with the Human Awareness Institute. So let's start with the core ethical thing, which is the Human Awareness Institute as a school for teaching healthy, loving, sexual relationships in the context of a sustained mission statement that I think what resonates as the core, what certainly the punchline is, we are committed to creating a world where everyone wins. And at the heart of this relationship is a contract with, you could call it the participant, the therapeutic patient, the client, the student. So we are a school, we are an organization, and the contract is one of education. And it can be participatory education, verbal education, but it's a contract of learning. And so the fundamental foundation of this contract is the trust of the student, of the participant, the patient, the client. Because if they do not trust that they will learn something, and if they do not trust that they will be better off for the learning, and this is pretty rational, but if you can imagine understanding that I'm going to take time off work, I'm going to drive, I'm going to maybe take a plane, I'm going to pay the costs of wear and tear on the vehicle, the plane, the drive. Maybe I'll take a Friday off, maybe a Monday off, etc. Maybe I have to take longer. I'm going to take a substantial amount of time, a substantial amount of money, some wear and tear, some effort. And for many of us, a much bigger cost is the risk factor. Maybe I'm feeling a little fragile. Maybe I'm afraid of the unknown because it doesn't always work out. And I'm afraid of being hurt in that unknown. And I'm afraid of coming away feeling insignificant and like I failed, or like I was too dumb to figure it out, or I just did the same old thing again and now I'm left feeling terrible. These are the big costs for many of us, is that risk. And the question is, if I'm going to spend all that time, all that emotional risk, all that money, will I be better off? And it's important to note that unless a student, a client, a participant says, yes, I think I will, I believe you. I believe you when you say your mission. I believe you when you state your commitment. I believe you when you say, show the photos on the website of all the smiling faces and da-da-da. I believe you. The Human Awareness Institute and all of the facilitators' work does not exist, meaning it's predicated on the trust in the client, the participant, etc., that their relational life will be better off as a result of that risk, because it is a risk. There is always an element of unknown. And the trust breaks down to, I will learn something that will help me feel good by helping me succeed in this domain, and helping me, succeed to, experience a better sexuality, a more, greater sense of self-worth, self-care, self-love, etc. And I believe that you will do your best. That's also an important thing, because it's not entirely a trust that everything will go perfect. It's a trust that you will do your best. Like you're doing your best to try and help me. And there's also the trust in the repair. That's a big aspect, because that's one of the differentiators, or can be a differentiator with a school like this, is if it doesn't work out, you're not going to just leave me in the lurch. You'll try and help make it right. Because if we expect that if the teacher, the organization, etc., makes a mistake, that we're just left as roadkill, meaning if they, rear end us accidentally, that we're left behind, well, that doesn't feel right. So trust in that is the foundation stone of the entire organization, meaning no money changes hands, and the nonprofit status is not granted, meaning if the state of California doesn't trust in this being a nonprofit venture for public good, then there's no tax break and there's no nonprofit organization. If the IRS doesn't trust in that same method, that this is not for profit, etc., this is a public service, there's no tax-free organization. If the student doesn't trust, there's no function. And so this is the primary foundation stone of the entire matrix of relationships. Now, it's also worth noting that if there's no trust and there's no student, then there's no organization, because there's no purpose, because the mission is to serve the client, the student, particularly in a nonprofit context. The mission is not to make as much money as possible or to generate as much business for the facilitators, or to just arrive at work and do nothing, or drive around in circles. No, there is no There is no organization, no mission, no activity, no purpose without the client. So the client is the foundation. We want to serve the client. And then the question is, does the client, have you done a good enough job in your research, in integrating your intention with your behavior and that research? Do you know what you're doing enough so that I will trust you? And in the first step in this, the trust is in the marketing. Have you marketed this? Meaning, have you presented this in a way that I trust? The secondary stage is, have you behaved in a way that I trust? And the third stage is, is the impact one that I trust? And I think the fourth stage is, over time, if there's any facility, meaning or if the person goes out and learns in other areas, once the student becomes the master, once the student learns the subject matter, does the student, the client, the participant, the patient, still trust and believe and respect the protocol, the behavior pattern? So there's different levels of trust all along the way, and so the ethics, because remember, ethics is the path that leads to sustainability, that leads to the most value, the most unnecessary suffering. And in this case, we're looking at an ethics that will lead to a relationship being able to navigate all of those different stages of trust. So I trusted your marketing, and then I trusted to have the experience, and then I trusted to maybe work one-on-one with a facilitator, have more experience, maybe become a team member. And I trusted the intention. And now, if we pursue the subject matter to the end, now that I have a sense of this whole terrain, do I still trust and respect all that I've seen looking backwards? Like as the child, who of course trusts their parents, initially coming into the relationship, as an adult looking back, do they feel used and foolish and humiliated and, just like the whole thing was a joke? Or do they feel like, wow, I really appreciate the fact that my parents did this and didn't do this, and they knew what they were doing over here. It didn't feel very great at the time, but I think that was a good choice what they did here, and so we're then, as an adult, or at least a grown-up, looking back at the parenting relationship. It's the same in a lover or any friendship. If I knew then what I know now, would I begin the relationship? And that's kind of the ultimate in sustainability, because that's the world where everyone wins. Meaning, when you can go from an innocent all the way to a master, meaning a sophisticate or an adult, a graduate, and you have that respect for the entire continuum, that's a sustainable relationship. It's also a relationship in which the the teacher, the organization, is motivated and can easily support your graduation, your maturity. Meaning, when as an adult, the parent really has done their homework and knows that the teenager, etc., will almost certainly agree with the parent can't wait for the teenager to grow up to see what they're talking about. If the parent is teaching discipline and the child won't get out of bed until 11 a.m. and stuff, and then, the teenager gets fired from a few jobs, the parent can't wait for the teenager to grasp, like, oh, my parent's not just trying to be a jerk. They're trying to prepare me for a world in which I can be independent, which requires me to go to work on time. And so there's actually a celebration in being able to be in the fruition of that role. Whereas in an unhealthy dynamic, like where daddy's, molesting his daughter at 6 years old, and this is our little secret, and da-da-da-da-da. You see, the older that daughter becomes, the more she understands that her father knew there was nothing loving about this. And no, it's not a little secret. He's used her, turned her into a dirty secret that this culture can't process in a way that has isolated her, because there isn't, the culture shames, our culture passes on the shame of its own ignorance to the people it is ignorant about. So this being a culture that is ignorant around the dynamics of incest, so it doesn't have sensitivity, rather than owning that we need to grow as a culture, we just stigmatize the people we are too ignorant to relate to. And so that relationship turns into bitterness, into rage and sadness, because it can't be undone. But the older you get, the more you understand how wrong that was, how that was a cruel betrayal. So this is the center relationship, and it is all founded. The most valuable commodity that a school and organization has is trust. Trust in those that it is formulated to serve. A business is formulated to serve its customers. A school is organized to to serve its students. And so that's the foundation of the relationship. That releases the participation, the money, the time, the risk, etc. So trust. So one could say that the school, anytime the school does something that builds its trust and its trustworthiness, that it is investing in its future. Anytime it betrays that trust and that trustworthiness, it is destroying its future. And in a school framework, with participation, it is also betraying the future of its students, because they go hand in hand. So that's the core relationship of ethics here. And so the ethical path is that path which will create, sustain, and build the trust in the entire cycle of that relationship. Meaning a truly masterful teacher will help you go through that entire cycle and come out such that another teacher would have great respect for that school. And of course, this is a scatter pattern. So there will be certain aspects. You know, an informed teacher will say, that bit doesn't relate to my experience here, or that could damage someone in this category. Okay, they haven't done their work there, but over here, you know, that's good. That's useful. It had a good impact in this area, not so much in this area. It seems really good for men in this age range, focusing on this, not so much for this. And so as you become more aware, you develop more distinctions in this capacity. So we're looking at a particular event in which it's a recorded 10-hour session that begins with Peter Sandhill convincing me to take 3 times the amount of mushrooms that I feel safe with, on the basis of a promise that he's going to take a rock-solid stand for my well-being. And it's a promise that no adult has ever made to me, because the imagery used was Gandalf in the Mines of Moria, where he went into the depths, fighting the Balrog. If you've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Peter Sandhill and I have both seen and read that, and so that symbol had meaning. But it's a symbol of Gandalf with his staff standing, facing a trauma being, a being of fire, a being of the depths, a reptilian being. So we're looking at the 200-million-year-old crocodile that is within the human psyche, in the reptilian brain. That fight, flight, freeze mechanism that's designed to protect us at some level, but which, you know, it simultaneously overrides, overshadows, and destroys so many of our relationships, because its focus is on core body survival. And it is the sociopath within each one of us. And whenever that traumatic organism is triggered, that fight, flight, freeze, whenever it's triggered, you know, love is out the window. You know, loyalty is out the window. You know, being empathic, you have no empathy when you're in the sociopathic brain, when you're in the fight, flight, freeze dynamic of the reptilian brain. When you've got unresolved traumas and your brain thinks that you're going to die, whether it's true or not is another matter, but when it thinks you're going to die and enters that place, you know, everything else is fair game. And Gandalf is protecting the company, the fellowship, by standing on a narrow bridge. And wreathed in fire, the Balrog is coming across to kill the company. And Gandalf puts his staff on the bridge and says, "You will not pass." And he stakes his life on that moment. And first it looks like he's going to stay up. The tail of the beast comes up and whips Gandalf into the abyss, into the unknown, into the unconscious. Gandalf falls with the Balrog, protecting the company. Now this is his moment of transcendence, we learn later. This is when Gandalf the Grey becomes the White. This is when he becomes great, with the conscious sacrifice of the present identity to confront the reptilian brainstem, to protect the innocence of the fellowship, to protect the mission to return the ring of power, the ring of domination, the ring of fear, to Mount Doom. This is the archetypal hero's journey. And as I hesitate to go into the unknown, as every trauma survivor who has experienced PTSD and, in some, or, different levels of trauma and stuff, not able to bond, the birth cycle into a world with two parents who are unable to emotionally bond with their child, who are unable to stop reenacting the intergenerational betrayal and shame cycle and abuse cycle, physically, sexually, emotionally, with an innocent child. As every child that falls into this culture and into this world, only to find the walls up where they can't connect with either parent. That abyss is a very dark place. It's a horrific place, filled with paranoias, and demons, and witches, because these are the faces of the psyche, dishonored, rejected, marginalized, shut down, kept in the dark for years. When you meet these wraith-like personas in your parents that are being masked by Mr. Happy Face, by Mrs. Smiley Face, where everything's fine. We're a shadow-denying culture. It's a horrific experience. And I've never been drunk, never been drawn to it, never taken drugs recreationally, because you don't want to open up Pandora's box, particularly when you're completely unprepared for it. And one of the problems with the superficial New Age movement, where the outside is coated with sugar, is you don't have a mental framework for dealing with the inside demons that are just below that frosting. It's like when you peel back the cake and you see the rage, the hostility, the hatred, the self-loathing, the isolation, the terror, the insanity below the mask of the perfect parent that has no language, because one of the things that we do so well in this culture is we mask the demons with perfectionism, with language, with denial, just giving short bursts of hostility anytime towards the child when they start uncovering and looking beneath the surface to make sure they stay right on the surface. Well, the psychedelic experience, the opening experience, takes you beyond those masks. That's the whole purpose. And so, in a sense, Peter Sandhill is taking the verbal role, the stated verbal role, that I'm going to die protecting this company if necessary. And on that basis, I am fighting with you, I am arguing with you to take 3 times the amount of mushrooms that you're comfortable with, to override all of your fear and body anxiety and stuff. I had spent an hour and a half telling Peter Sandhill some of the disasters of past therapists, some of the this, that, and the other. And Peter's response is not to say, well, maybe we should slow down if you've got this, stuff, we can always do this again. That was my response. Let's go into this gently. But no, Peter's response was, he says, I want you to get your money's worth. We actually were physically arguing about mushrooms. I'd take them out of the pile, he'd put it in. Now, you can see in that dynamic that you can see a scatter pattern of interesting motivations. You could say that on a positive light shadow, Peter Sandhill knew that I would be one of the few clients that would be making this video 4 years, 5 years later, etc., that would actually show some light that could lead to either the dissolution of the corrupt aspects of highest power structure and his own delusions. So one could say that the sincere part of Peter Sandhill was looking to me as a source of hope. Maybe you will be able to show me out of my own corruption, out of what I don't know that I don't know. Because there's something about you that I don't think you're going to drop this and believe all my bullshit. So if I can just get you enough of a high dose, maybe you'll pull me out of some of my bullshit. So you could say on the light shadow side, there's something of that longing, the longing to escape the mediocrity of the delusion. You could say on the dark side that there's something about Peter Sandhill that wanted to control and direct the session, which is more suggestible when you have higher doses, because I learned to survive my parents through pattern analyzing. And that's what we're doing right here, by the way. Pattern analyzing is a science that can see through a lot of insanity, basically. So it's a protection against insanity. So if you have two insane parents in different ways, and the psyche is trying to find some basis to safely connect with reality and not leave my body entirely, pattern language science is one coping strategy. And so, particularly since a number of people considered my father to be a genius, an incredibly scared, emotionally 6-year-old, petulant, and tantruming genius. So, having some mental astuteness, and since he was lonely, he just decided to, talk to me as, as a college professor would, from, ever since we learned to talk. So that's going to lean me in the direction of language, which makes pattern analyzing a little bit more of a good coping strategy as opposed to dissociation completely. So you can also see that the amount of dissociation, chaos, and overwhelm, and not being able to think clearly that a high dose of psychedelics leads me into also disables that defense. Because I can remember when we got to the point when Peter Sandhill announced in the middle of the session that he hadn't told his wife Sarah that this was a psychedelic session, because he thought it would be easier that way, and because when he had communicated to Sarah that he was talking and telling me to take MDMA with him 10 years ago, she had expressed healthy alarm, good for her, and I think he didn't want to he wanted to go past her alarm without having to deal with it. So just lie, right? At that point, I'm in this like everything's wonderful phase, which is what happens when you have gone through your mental filters. The mental filters are designed to protect you against a repeated experience of abuse and trauma. meaning I would not have had to develop pattern language scanning to feel sane and stay alive if my parents had been sane and empathic. You need this kind of pattern recognition technology when you're a sensitive and your parents are out of sync with their language and they're protecting unconscious agendas and they're willing to use a variety of violences in order to do that. The pattern language helps map out what they're actually doing as opposed to what they say they're doing and what you're allowed to talk about. You need that to be able to understand when you're getting near the point where you're going to be hit, because every hit is a trauma as a sensitive, and of course as a child in relationship to a giant. And so Peter's also on the dark side, disabling all of my defenses against his insanity. And on the dark side, you could say that there's some part of him that is enraged, that is competitive, that is envious of the lucidity, and wants to knock it out of the way and see how, in his move, promising to be the one that goes into the abyss. As soon as the abyss emerges, he throws me into the abyss and runs off. Oh, Sarah, what happened? And so, in that kind of a move, sometimes people don't come out of the abyss. And so, on the dark side of that, you have the light side of the shadow. Maybe you'll help me out of my prison. The dark side, maybe I can throw you down somewhere where you will never confront me with my defenses again. How dare you begin to start seeing me in this area, go to hell, And so this is the dark, murderous aspect of the betrayer. We have a shadow on both sides, a luminous shadow that is seeking every re-traumatization, everything, for the effort to have it come to consciousness. Maybe this time you will learn what's going on. We have this dark side that's trying to destroy everything healthy and everything positive out of a deep form of rage and self-loathing. It's often the tension between the authentic self and the adaptive personality. Because when you have unhealthy parents that demand adaptation because they will not accept the authentic self, unhealthy parents demand some correlation with their disease, and they hate and attack, or their disease hates and attacks that which is challenging the disease, that which is healthy. And so there's this tension where the culture in many ways is the disease, and it hates the authenticity that exposes the corruption, the disruption in the status quo, because it doesn't know how to deal with it, partly. But also, it doesn't like a challenger. We may have one of the dumbest education systems in history and in the world, but you try and go down and talk to the local principal about, how would you like to start teaching the kids this and this? They can't stand it. They can't wait to hand you 50 paperwork forms. And the whole purpose of the protocol is to make sure that nothing intelligent can make it into the actual child, because if the child could actually start thinking and understand just how absurd what's being crammed into them is in the context of the environment in which they're going to grow up, they would all revolt, and suddenly the power structure around them would collapse because it has questionable legitimacy. And so there's this tension in this dynamic. So let's start coming into this, because before this session began, Peter betrayed his marriage. And in doing so betrayed Hi. So that's the place to begin, because the purpose of a sitter in a psychedelic journey is to hold container. Now, you can only hold container if you honor the containers that you are in. What I mean by that is, if I want to host you in my house, I can't do a good job of that if I have knocked away the foundation of the house before you arrive. So if I've gone along and knocked out every other 2x6 in the walls, if I've taken away the shearing, if I've dug out under the mud, and say, come on, I want to host you in my house, that invitation is framed around the idea that there is a stable container. Now, before there is Peter, the wizard of psychedelic therapy, there's Peter, and he connects with Sarah. Now, Sarah then shepherds him into the facilitator body. Without Sarah, there's no marriage. Without that relationship, it's dubious, given what I've experienced, that Peter would be in the facilitator body. So Peter's primary container is his marriage. Now, this is not just language. This is also mathematics. I've had the great honor to be in marriage now for a couple of years. Ironically, by inverting a lot of what the facilitators were doing to me and trying to learn by doing the opposite of what they were doing, and finding that resulted in marriage. But a marriage is a synergy, meaning what it creates as a learning, growing, healing opportunity is not just double, it's 5 times. My creativity, as an example, exploded 6,000% over the creativity of before engaging as a committed couple. A true synergistic marriage is a field that releases, it's a probability field that is so much bigger than the individual that it is an act of profound hostility to betray it. It is an act of profound self-hatred, hatred of life, hatred of the self, hatred of the psyche, hatred of one's partner, to betray it. Because it would be very similar to, let's take Warren Buffett, since we all love money in this culture. It'd be very similar to if Buffett, decided to betray, break the law so that he'd be shut down and lose all of his customers, etc., and took his number one couple of investments and, behaved in a way that took that money out of that investment and instead, bought candy with it or something like that. He's just an old fat guy, without, in that paradigm, without the synergy. So his migration from a scared, traumatized, dissociative boy, he was also severely abused as a child, neglected, into the Wizard of Omaha, is through his integrity and his discipline in relating, in this case, to money, but also to the law and people. And so that's his framework. And in doing so, and he's noted this, he's very lucky since he was, there's often a correlation between the level of emotional abuse and the level of mental acuity, much like there's a correlation between if you blind the eyes, the ears develop with more acuity because you're filling in. In a healthy relationship, you balance the spread between mental patterning and emotional patterning. But if both your parents shut off the feelings, now the mental patterning has to compensate and extrapolate for the emotional patterning which isn't there. And so you have, the phenomena which to some degree expresses in myself and to some degree expresses in Buffett in different ways, of an overcompensation in the mathematical element. Like I often see things in pictures and in geometries, etc., which means that while it may take me a few hours to say all of this, I get it in 30 seconds, sometimes in 2 seconds. It's like I get a relationship like this, meaning I told Ann Watts the day the facilitators refused to apologize to me. I said, Ann, there are more than 30 threads that say that this is wrong. They cannot win and hold this position. I'm trying to help them win. I'm giving you a free, easy pathway that I can see is the easiest pathway for you, which is to apologize. Because that's the beginning of ownership, which means that you can do this and come out the hero. I told Jason Weston, I said, you've got an unpalatable secret. You've got to turn it into a palatable truth, and it's not going to be palatable with me exposing you. You've got to lead on this. Well, that's that pattern understanding of looking out for their survival. But when you're being thrown under the bus in fear, when you don't have the ability to see who you're dealing with inside and out, you betray your greatest friend. This is one of the most important aspects of our mythologies because it's something we all do in the facilitation of our survival coping mechanism. Meaning, when we adapt too closely to our cult, our culture, we betray that which is inside that tells us the truth, that can guide us, for something that's much more shabby, but is considered normal or cool. It's in a Faustian sense, the betrayal of the soul for the devil. We'll give you the money, etc., but you're going to give up the eternal truth, that which is much more intelligent than any culture, that which you're being asked to give up the golden goose for an egg, you see. But of course, the golden goose has given birth to 10,000 languages, 10,000 human cultures. The golden goose is what came up with some idea like the Human Awareness Institute. So you don't give away the goose. You don't give away the foundation stone of being trustworthy for a little egg. It's like, I've got my little name, I've got my little reputation. No, you sacrifice the egg to protect the goose. Or you fall down, the rise and fall of empires, because that's what needs to happen. You are standing on shaky mathematics if you behave in any other way. And there's, of course, a great tension between the feelings of the child trying to protect an abuser or an enabler, or enable a dysfunctional pattern, and the dispassion of the mathematics. You don't go up against the laws of physics and win. And one of the things that I enjoy so much about Elon Musk is he follows a very narrow thread through reality into astronomical levels of service for our species. And I won't go into all of that here, but he does it through first principles. And it's most of the people that understand that domain even fuzzily. Peter Thiel doesn't follow it quite as adamantly as Musk does, but he's smart enough to know never bet against Elon, because that you don't win when you go against mathematics, but you can kill the message bearer, as Copernicus found out, trying to point mathematics out to the Catholic Church. The body can be killed, but you cannot stop the tide of momentum that is based on physics. It's a losing battle, and it's a harder and harder grave to dig yourself out of the longer you hold a position that is not sound. Well, Ann Watts said that she knew this, which meant that, mentally she grasped it. She didn't know it emotionally, or she would have saved her organization at that moment by going public, because that's the thing to do. If you've got people who don't know what they're doing, and they're maintaining the momentum based on ignorance and fear, and you do know what you're doing, you do them an enormous service by going public, because they won't be supported in a corrupt pattern by the healthiest aspect within the public. And so it can save an organization. Now, I'm 1,005 hours in to trying to communicate what I saw in 30 seconds because of two reasons. One is I've gotten the message since I was young that people were going to kill me if I spoke this mathematics, because it's not easy to shake it, one. And two, we're pretty good in this culture at cutting people off so that they can't access within themselves that which would challenge, some of the power structures that we're basing our cult on, but we're not basing our science on. We're manipulating science to support, unsustainable formulas as a cult. And of course, we see that symbol all around. But our fear of the unknown is much bigger than our fear of being part of an absurdity. And so we're pretty, we're pretty cutting. We'll let Asperger's people study the history of ants. That's just fine. But if they start turning their eyes to the parental structure or to the government or to, their spiritual community, we go in there with the knives and try and chop them to bits. We always have as a mythology. You can go back a few thousand years and the truth teller is cut up into 14 pieces. And the pieces are scattered through throughout the land. And they still come out. You know, some peasant will pluck a reed from what was buried and start playing, and the truth will start flowing out from nature, from that reed, because you can't kill a fractal pattern without ultimately destroying that which it's built in. So Peter is coming in on his marriage as a foundation of his marriage. If he betrays that container, he also betrays me, because he's already betrayed himself by betraying the marriage, which is bigger than him and Sarah. It's much bigger. Now, he betrays his marriage, and who knows in what ways and all that, but the one data point we have is his words on a recording saying, "I didn't tell Sarah this was a psychedelic session because it's less complicated that way." And so he's taking his protector, which is Sarah, who's more sophisticated and also fear-based than Peter, in order to begin this container. And then once he's here, he's saying, I'm willing to die, to protect you. But he has no foundation for that transcendent moment. He's already betrayed his primary foundation. And let's look at the betrayal there. Well, let's look at what's happening here. There is a probability that the Human Awareness Institute will not exist in a matter of years because of not just this betrayal, etc., but the whole betrayal cycle we'll get to later. And I'm sure if Peter Sandhill had gone to his facilitators and said, I'd like to do a psychedelic session with Dane, he's coming to me because you all recommended me. How do you guys feel about that? Well, first of all, Sarah is a facilitator. That would have stopped right there. If he'd gone to Sarah and said, I'd like to do this, how do you feel about that? That would have stopped there. And Peter would have been challenged to come to consciousness with, his addictions, with his lusts, with his power games, whatever that stuff would come to light. He would come to consciousness around what was buried in the friction pattern between what's all this, why are you constantly with this participant pushing your facilitator boundaries, doing this, that, and the other, one. But two, maybe we should look at what's going on there. It's worth noting that a month earlier or so, I wrote about planning to commit suicide. And that's a whole nother thing. But you don't have a foundation of trust that says after you take 100 of our events, you will be so depressed and traumatized in your relationship history with 30 high participants that it feels easier to die than figure out how to get out of the mess psychologically that you find yourself in as a result of following our teaching. I mean, that is not a foundation stone that you get to at the end that leads to sustainability. That leads to an incredibly high burn rate and churn rate within the community if a percentage of people are regularly getting that. And high has a high churn burn rate. And one of the concerns is that in some ways it is, there's both, but one of the most stable factions in the community is the highly abused reenacting abuse faction within the community, because that faction protects the abuser because that faction is confused about the difference between love and abuse, because every good abuser covering their tracks tries to spin their abuse, their cruelty, as love. And the highest, the faction that has the highest concentration of that buys into it. That is their definition of love, as being, abused over and over again, sexually or otherwise, and calling it love. And so that's, that is a faction, and that's a concern. But let's look at why Sarah needs to be included in here. First of all, she's his colleague. She's his sponsor into the facilitator body. She provided all the money. What Peter is doing affects money. It affects the law, which affects money. It affects reputation. So Sarah has sponsored Peter into money that he didn't earn, into the facilitator body, which, well, it's doubtful he would have earned without that. And into the marriage that has given him a container. Now, Peter was betraying this 10 years ago. It's now 15 years ago. I should get my dates sorted out. But within 5 minutes of my first session with Peter Sandhill, I'm pattern sorting out what to do with his erection. My first session with a male relationship therapist, recommended by the entire facilitator body. I chose Peter and Sarah because of the age gap. My first girlfriend was 58 years old when I was 26. Peter and Sarah were modeling some of that. I thought, I relate to that. I'm tired of people saying this is weird. And that's what this cult does, is says it's normal for 80-year-old men to be with 20-year-old girls, but it's weird for 26-year-old men to be with 58-year-old girls. Anyway, I thought, well, I thought I was intelligent to pick a more experienced lover, and to pick someone based on communication patterns as opposed to sexual patterns, because you communicate 24/7. You have sex a few times a week. Which is more important? Communication. Pick someone based on communication patterns and have sex with them. Don't pick someone based on sexual patterns and be all over the map and be driven insane by the communication pattern. So I did a session with Peter and Sarah, which made Sarah my therapist, my teacher. She was also my facilitator. And so Peter broke his marriage container in a session by telling me that he wanted to have a homosexual lover. He was bisexual, and he was attracted to me, but Sarah wasn't all that keen on him having two lovers. Sarah was not that keen on having an open marriage, one, and she was not keen on it being me. Now, he didn't do me the great service of telling me that's because he was breaking his facilitator agreements. That's because you don't express sexual interest in a client. That's because, that's because she understands this is risky. Peter put it all on the line before. And he tried to push us both into taking MDMA at that time. And by that point, I was too freaked out, and I left. He told Sarah that he did that. And then he reported back to me that Sarah was uncomfortable. Now, when I asked Sarah at the time, because I met her in workshop, she was my facilitator, and I saw that she was afraid of me. She looked at me with eyes of fear, and she didn't used to do that. And so I went to her and I said, why are you doing that? And she said, I'm not. So she lied to me. Did she lie to herself or just to me? That's a betrayal, because her truth could have protected her. You see, if I understood that Peter was breaking his facilitator agreements by talking about his erection and blah, 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 and encouraging me to do MDMA, then my ethics would be to stop doing that. Say, no, I'm not asking you to break your facilitator agreements. I don't lie to people. That's not me. I've never lied to a friend. I've never lied to a lover. And I used to say I never lied to anyone, but there were a few areas where I fought the IRS and lost, and so I did some workarounds that are, I think they hold up in court, but I don't consider them, 100% honest any more than I consider the government 100% honest. So I can't say that I've never lied to anyone, but it's pretty close. And, so that's always made sense to me, because if you want to be loved, and you are only, quote, loved, whatever it is you call love. If love is sex, then if the only reason someone has sex with you is because you lied to them, they're not actually having sex with you. They're having sex with their fantasy that you've created with your lie. Well, I've always wanted people to have sex with me, which means the only way they can have sex with me is if I tell them everything I think they don't want to know, and they still want to have sex with me. Then they're having sex with me, not a fantasy. I've always thought that was a horrible setup for me, to have someone adore me and know full well that they don't adore me. They just adore what they think I'm going to be. And so I always knock that out of the way up front, and that collapses most of the attraction. But if anyone remains, it's like, wow, this person is into me. Which is why when I met my wife, she read in the first email, and she's Filipina, and, this is a horrible thing to read for a Filipina. I said, I'm not Catholic. Everyone there is. I don't believe in the Christian God. Everyone does. I do not want to have kids. That's horrible. I'm not going to give you any money. And I'm not looking to get married. Everyone there wants to get married. So just, this is who you're dealing with. And it's very unlikely with the distance and the immigration policies that this will be a long-term relationship. Though I would, of course, be delighted if it turned out that way. And I am bossy, according to most of my girlfriends. Because, this is the unpalatable truth. I don't want to be a disappointer. I don't want to be, have the most beautiful sex of my life and all this, and then they learn this and they're like, what? You horrible person. It's just so unpleasant for them and for me, And so, to me, this is the path to real love. Because if someone knows all of that, I still think it's a great relationship. I think an intelligent person would want to find out, and so that filters through the intelligent people. It's like, an intelligent person appreciates honesty like that because it's unusual. And so intelligent people like me. And so there you have it. I get intelligent people. So So Peter betrayed all of that. And in doing so, destroyed, it's a form of self-hatred because it destroys his probability field. But it's also betrayal of his client because he's now resting on a broken container. It's like he's a crane trying to lift you out of the pit, but before he made the connection to pull you out of the pit, he went around and blew up all the hydraulic supports that would keep the plane, the crane stable. And now as he's trying to pull you up, he's toppling into the pit. So you don't need help from someone like that. And the worst thing from a mathematical point of view is to be told to prepare for help. Like if you're doing a trust exercise, they tell you to fall off the table backwards and into the group of 5 people. Well, when you're standing at the edge of the table and falling back because they've all told you they're going to catch you, if they cut off their arms just before doing that and you fall back and crack your head open, it's way worse than if they didn't tell you to trust them, you see, because you wouldn't have a cracked head. So you don't get the great vibe of we're here for you and all that. You get a cracked head, zero trust, and they don't have any arms to put you back together again because they cut those off just before they convinced you to fall backwards. And so it's that kind of dynamic which... So Peter had no right to risk Sarah's money, to risk Sarah's trust, to risk Sarah's reputation, to risk Hi's trust and reputation by doing this activity covertly. That is an act of betrayal. Now, you learn from a teacher by their behavior. And I was so out of my normal filtering that I remember thinking, and I told Ann Watts this in one of our first, quote, support responses, because she listened to Peter saying this. I told Ann Watts, because I get into so much trouble with, I should say 90% of people reject me and punish me for telling them the things that are true about me that they don't want to hear. Now, I know I'm doing both of us a service, but that doesn't mean that the majority of people are intelligent enough to appreciate that. Apparently, the majority of people would like me not to tell them that, which ruins their fantasy. And they had a whole plan to be madly in love with their fantasy for 6 months, and then to say, why does it always go this way? Oh, and then to have a big drama separation when they find out 6 months later, because they'll refuse to ask any questions and they'll refuse to listen, etc. And so, of course, it's 6 months later. So they had this all nicely planned out, and I've just ruined it on the first date. And they liked me. It's like, I wouldn't have minded having a fantasy with you for 6 months. And they punish me, And this is why I understand, when women complain that men lie and cheat on them, I imagine that they've gotten tired of being punished for telling the truth. And so you kind of deserve each other if you're going to take such a sloppy research attitude and reward someone with sex for lying to you. Well, and then tell men constantly that they're all about sex. That's what I get told as a male. I get told constantly that I just want to get into people's pants. It's like a brainwashing. Meaning I've never done that in my life. I have never just tried to get into someone's pants. I mean, there's been plenty of times I've been attracted, but I've always leveled with someone, which ruins the getting into the pants most of the time, because most people are looking from the fantasy perspective and just see that I've broken the fantasy. They're not looking for who's a person who will be straight with me, and that's a rare thing to find. So they're using a filter that ruins the sexual prospects 90% of the time. But I'm still told who I am. I'm told that I'm a man interested in sex, and then when I do the exact opposite, sometimes I'm told that I'm dumb, because it really is true that I'm just trying to have sex, but I'm obviously too dumb, or I wouldn't have said that. That's the attitude that a number of women take towards me, and so, maybe men get tired of that brainwashing and say, okay, I guess I am a man just trying to have sex, and we all know what these women don't want to hear, so let's avoid these topics. Let's let them have their fantasy, and then they can villainize me in 6 months, and I'll be confused and do it again. So Peter betrays the marriage in all of these areas, comes in weak, and Peter's ethics, because of the mathematics, are to put his marriage first. He should have done it 15 years ago. My wife, I've never cheated on a woman in my life. I've never lied to a woman in my life. I hold good boundaries. I've had Thai masseuses, some of the most beautiful bodies in the world, some of the most sensuous and feminine energy, cross a boundary, and I've said no. It's behind closed doors. They're into me. No, that's the boundary. Pay attention, because they're betraying, and I have no illusions that it's love. This is not love. This is cruelty. If someone is seducing you out of something that's good, they hate you and they hate themselves. And if they're doing it for money, it's shit. This is not love. Maybe lust, maybe adolescent control dynamics. It's not love. When you love someone, you support what is good in them, which is their future, based on underlying fundamentals. And this is, we're so illiterate as a culture, we don't even understand the difference between this. But it is an act of profound hatred to seduce a man out of a good marriage that's based on fundamentals. So I stopped that. But even so, my wife had been betrayed several times by the sociopathic element in men. And so she had fits at times around me just going and having a massage. And so I had to decide whether to betray the marriage, which wasn't marriage at that point. At that point, we were just exploring. Whether to betray the relationship, or whether to stick with her feelings at that time and go through that process. And it was perfectly clear. I mean, it was frustrating and irritating that I couldn't have a massage while I had PTSD as a result of Peter Santel and the facilitators, which could really help. It was irritating as hell to not have the freedom to do what I knew would be good for me and not damage the emotional bond with what was to become my wife. But that's why she became my wife, was I put her first. And it was a mathematical awareness, because none of those masseuses had loyalty, had capacity outside of the massage container. My wife did. So what I look at is the probability field. And I was already seeing enormous probability fields around this relationship. So in other words, it's an act of profound cruelty to undermine that which is giving birth to life, including the life of this video. This is a child of my relationship. It's out of the probability field of my relationship, which is a particularly strong relationship based on an incredible amount of truth and underlying mathematics. So Peter had a loyalty to Sarah that he had to honor because it's his foundation stone. And Peter and Sarah had a loyalty to High. The underlying foundation is to High. Why? Look at the mathematics. Without High, Peter doesn't exist in my life. Meaning if High hadn't taken Peter in, so it's 2. If Sarah hadn't taken Peter in, High wouldn't have taken them in. And so Sarah is also sticking her neck out for Peter. So Peter has 2 foundation stones he has to honor first, High and Sarah. Now, when he betrays Sarah, he also betrays High. When he betrays High, he betrays Sarah again. There's a dual betrayal. Well, you cannot invite someone to go into the biggest container abyss journey of their life standing on 2 rotten containers that you betray as you enter. It just doesn't work mathematically. So this is, so Peter's job to his wife was to say, this is what I'd like to do. Does that strengthen or weaken our marriage? If it does not strengthen their marriage, he has no business getting anywhere near it. Now, if his marriage is rotten, meaning if the marriage is destroying who he is as opposed to releasing it, he has no business in the marriage. But then he should get out of the marriage. But if you're in, there is no doubt whether it's a negative probability field or a positive probability, the probability field is much bigger when you work in partnership with another person. You've got the dynamic of synergy. The whole is bigger than the sum of the part. Now, Peter's loyalty to High is, look, you are giving me business. All of the High facilitators are giving Peter carte blanche to all of the participants. In every one of my 30 workshops in which Peter or any other facilitators were there, they all have a pact with one another that pretty much regardless of what backfighting is going on, and I know about backfighting because in addition to learning about Peter's marriage, Peter talks about, oh, the so-and-so is fighting with so-and-so, or, whatever. So regardless of the backfighting that goes on with the within the High facilitator body, they all present a pristine image in front of the room. And it is on the basis of that pristine image, which is somewhat illusory to varying degrees, that they all give each other work. This is my wonderful husband, Peter. He's so wonderful. He would love to help you with all this stuff. Anything you need, we'd love you. We're here for you. We can help. It's not, we're good with knees and feet. We don't know what we're doing with the rest of the body. It's not, we've gotten a little bit of training in this area. We don't know what we're doing over here. It's like we want to help, period. We want to love you, period. And so there's a endorsement without caveat, which is, of course, wonderful. Who doesn't want to be helped? Who doesn't want to be loved? Who doesn't want wonderful relationships? Again, we're back to the cornerstone of trust. Do these people have my best interest at heart? Well, if they do, they will have boundaries. They will study for the 5 to 10 years it takes to be excellent in this. They will tell you their limits. They will respect those limits. They will follow the data They will ask you if you are helped. They will see what's good for you by the data. Meaning they'll ask you, okay, you went and saw me. Are you now in a good relationship? Did you do what I said? Ah, you did what I said and that you broke up, and now you haven't found anyone. I see. Okay, what about you? Okay, you're still in, but it's not working. Okay, what about you? You follow the data. And you don't prescribe medicine unless it heals people, unless it resolves the pattern. And if you really want to be integrous, you communicate the statistics. We ask our pharmaceuticals to say, 38% of the patients get better, and these are the side effects. And the pharmaceuticals, even with that law, are constantly trying to fuck with that and hide all the negative studies and do this and that and the other and exaggerate this and in their advertisements very quickly, may cause loss of sight, may cause this, Go see your doctor about our great new wonder pill. But you've got to follow the data if you're serving the client. You've got to understand, or you've just got a Ponzi scheme that is based on the presentation. The packaging looks so nice. Don't those ads look great? It's lovely curvaceous skins, the nice soothing voice of that very attractive person on TV saying why you should take this or that toxic drug. So wonderful. But we have some effort to maintain the client's ability to choose by giving them statistical facts. And so this is one of the most corrupt aspects of the school, is it does not gather data. It refuses to gather data, which is one of the best defenses against data sets that are not terribly encouraging. Meaning I have met team members, interns, who have done more than 200 workshops and that seem haggard and despairing around relationships. Well, if we had data sets that said, I've met an intern who silently withdrew and now has PTSD and is doing therapy quietly because, that's her ethic, not to tell the public. She knows exactly how she got PTSD as a result of being on team. And she understands that knowledge would not be welcome within the high community. And rather than be rejected, she withdrew silently and is doing therapy for 10 years. That's a pretty small pool out of which that story emerged. And that's just one person speaking up. So we've got a rotten data set. Now, you cover up the data when you're not committed to improving the data. You expose the data and challenge yourself when you're committed to the result. Because no mathematics is sound. The mathematics is never perfect within human consciousness. In the Japanese, they honor that with, they make the Zen garden perfectly, and then they shake a few leaves down. They make a pot and do a little mark in it to acknowledge the fact that no human system is perfect. It's a rendition of a perfect system within human consciousness, which is too simplistic to grasp the symmetry. The sphere is the perfect system. An infinite number of lines, an infinite number of dimensions, but you can't deal with that consciously. So we refract the sphere down into different cruder geometric shapes that we can work with, but they're not perfect. The mathematics never fully lines up in the systems that we work with. So Peter's loyalty to High is to check with all the facilitators and to develop safeguards and protocols. Let's look at this. If it's a good idea, that we sit for some of our people to do psychedelic sessions. If that's a good idea, let's do it well. Well, what should High's protocol be around that? And you can actually develop a healthy protocol that is actually in the interest of people. And if Peter had followed that protocol, this could have been magnificent. Meaning if Peter had sat down with the facilitators and they'd really been interested, and what's interesting is the actual psychedelic part of the session was very healthy. The Peter part was very unhealthy. And so that's, and a lot of that was protocol, and a lot of that was the secrecy, fear aspects. So Peter needs to do that, to have a foundation to come in and hold container. Because energetically, he knows he's resting on those containers. So every time he violates them, he's going to feel weak and afraid because he can't support this on his own. His income disappears if High stops referring him work. His marriage disappears if Sarah gets fed up with, all the betrayals, etc. And then he's just Peter, and he's got a probability field around that, but is it as big as if he does his job well within this framework? Now, there's also an ethics of High to Peter. So what's the ethical role of the Human Awareness Institute to Peter Sandhill? Well, when the Human Awareness Institute refers Peter Sandhill as an unlicensed practitioner that they have chosen and trained, their job is to not set Peter up for failure. What I mean is, if I take a construction crew and I refer them to a client and I say, this crew is fabulous, you have no idea how great they are, just wonderful. And the client wants to do some elaborate stone carving and this and that and the other, and the crew doesn't know what they're doing. The crew is the client is going to be mad at the crew. They gave them this beautiful stone to carve, and they broke it. That was a priceless stone. Dane said you knew what you were doing. It's like, no, we didn't work on stones like this before. It's like, well, everyone's unhappy. The client has a $200,000 stone that's broken in half. The whole point was the carving and all that. They've got a broken stone. The crew has been shouted at, with $200,000 worth of grief and rage and attachment, etc., because they didn't do this. They felt humiliated. They didn't know what they were doing. And naturally, the client comes back to me. What the fuck why did you send these guys over? They broke it in the first day. You want to pay me $200,000? That's what this stone cost. Nobody's happy. It's a setup for failure. So High's responsibility to Peter Sandhill is, first of all, to have a training regimen that filters out, is he up for the job? And frankly, if he's into his lust over serving, he's not up to the job. Well, that's their job to find that out. Can he do it? Secondly, their job is to set up protocols that set him up to win. That's the biggest thing. I mean, my clients love my crew. Not because they're particularly good crew, but because I give them protocols. And I clean up after them. My crew can't pick up garbage. I don't know why, but they can't. Well, I do that. I clean up the garbage that after 5 years they can't manage. And so the crew looks great because I make them look great, because I know what the client needs and I do it. So High's job to its staff, to its employees, is to pick people that are able to do what they can do, and to only recommend them to do stuff that they're capable of doing, and to finish up the pieces, and to check with the client at the end. How did they do? And so I do all of that. And so, like with our last client we just finished, he said, I used to run a crew. I used to do painting. And I'm sorry I gave you such a hard time at the beginning, because I know how contractors work. And I was sure you were going to screw me at some point. It wouldn't be. He said, this is so surprising. It was done early. You did more than you said you would. The price was exactly what you said it was. I said, this is great. And I said, yeah, that happens 5% of the time in my industry. And I've set up my company to see that that happens most of the time with me through these protocols. So that's what, when you say I'm committed to a world where everyone wins, you start with your clients winning and you start with your facilitators winning. If you don't do that, you're not in that world. If you can't start with 2 people winning, the algorithm you're using to create the whole world winning doesn't work. And so High's ethical responsibility to Peter is to set him up to win. And one of the things you need to do that is to have boundaries. You can't just take on anything. You've got to say, I'm only about a 4 in this. Is that, and let me show you what that is. So here's what we can do. Come and look at this job. This is what we did here. We are not a 10 in this area. If you want really fine mortar work and this kind of thing, you want a concrete contractor that does this all the time. We can do 4 out of 10. It's good enough for most of our clients, and it's way more convenient because we're doing it as a full service, and it'll save you money. But in this area, we're a 4. And it doesn't even matter what the 4 is. Have a look. If that's what you want, we're able to do that. If it's, if you want something different, let's see if we can do it. Or if I need to hire and broker out and finish, because you've got to be pleased. That's how you go through millions of dollars in work over decades without being sued, without, there's still angry people at me. But it's not for being late. It's not for not communicating. It's not for going over budget. Sometimes people don't like the directness. And so, I did an independent survey, and there were some complaints that people wouldn't tell me personally. They would tell in the independent survey. And occasionally I get punished because someone tries to manipulate me, and I say, no, you can, I don't need the job, you can go hire someone else. That is the price. And they'll, be upset about that and punish me for that. But no, that's the deal. So High's job is to set Peter up to win. Now High's job is also to repair the damage. So High set Peter up to fail both times for more than a decade, meaning I have come out of dealing with Peter Sandhill more crazy and more damaged every single cycle of work I've done with Peter Sandhill. That means High set him up to fail. Now High wouldn't clean up their mess. It would be as if I sent my crew out to do the job, and the client said they did a terrible job. And I said, oh, well, that's them. You hired them. I guess this isn't my problem. Well, the client would be angry at me and the crew, and probably sue me or at least write terrible reviews and all that. So High's ethical responsibility is, if they're going to refer someone unlicensed with that they trained and chose without caveat, is they've got to clean up Peter's mess. Their ethical that's their ethical responsibility in their relationship to Peter. They've got to own, Peter, we let you down. We didn't give you the training. We didn't check up on you. We didn't see if you were doing your job. You see, my crew diverges constantly, and I fight with them constantly. Every week, it seems, the crew has a better idea. No, I know you told us to do this, Dane, but we had a better idea. We decided we would improve the job by doing it like this. And every time they do that, I say, I could give a shit about your improvements. You are not the customer. The customer asked for this. I told the customer they would get this, and that's what they're going to get. Now redo it and give the customer what they asked for. And of course, I will argue with the customer if the customer asks for something that is going to harm the customer, which is why I start the relationship with a 6-page, I think it's an 8-page questionnaire now. And I will not work for a customer that won't fill out my questionnaire, period. Because many customers don't know what they want and don't know what's good for them. And they don't understand the correlation between what they say they want and what they're asking for. You know, there are customers that say they want low maintenance and say they want plants that are high maintenance. Meaning, I want this plant and this plant and this plant, high maintenance. And then they'll tell you, I want a low maintenance garden. And you've got to argue with the customer. Which one is it going to be? These plants that are high maintenance or low maintenance and these other plants? What's it going to be? And if they're going to be crazy, they can be crazy with somebody else. Because they will rightly blame me if they manage to push through the idea that roses should be low maintenance because they want low maintenance roses, but they're not. They're high maintenance. So I have to do that with the customer. And then once I've sorted that out, I've got to do that with the crew. Meaning once the client has picked their high maintenance roses or da-da-da-da-da, and it's going to be like this and like this, and I'm clear that that customer will be happy with that result, then that's what happens. And if it doesn't happen, I pay for it. I often pay the crew to repair mistakes on me because I give fixed costs. The client shouldn't pay because I make a mistake. So that's the ethics of the High to Peter ratio. First, they've got to train him properly, they let him down. Secondly, they've got to review his work, they let him down. Thirdly, they've got to boundary his work within his competency, they let him down. Fourthly, they've got to inspect his work, they let him down. And fifthly, they've got to clean up their mistakes around this domain. And they threw him out to dry. They let him down when they repeatedly said this was not a high issue. So they're violating their ethics. So why would anyone trust, going back to here, any facilitator when they all met behind closed doors and asked me to sign a contract saying that I would never tell anyone, then that it was not a high issue and they would give no support. They didn't even want to understand how Peter had damaged me because that wasn't any of their business. But then weeks later, they're referring Peter Sandhill to a new lot of unsuspecting customers and setting him up to fail again. Now, it's important to understand in the mathematics of this that most betrayals go both ways. Meaning, if I'd had my wits about me rather than being high for the first time in my life, when Peter told me he hadn't told Sarah, his wife, about a professional relationship that involved legal aspects and my safety, and if I hadn't been in the middle of the first, hour of a 10-hour session, I'd have said, Peter, you fucking idiot, get on the phone to your wife and sort this out. I'm not going to be a secret keeper for your marriage, and I'm not going to be a part of you breaking up your life. Go do that with someone else, if that's your intention. It's not what a friend does. Well, as I say, nobody sits us down and communicates these ethics, and I'm talking to a camera because there's no one I can call right now that wants to hear all of this. So many things, we have to speak them before they can become conscious. We have to speak them before they become conscious. And they have to become conscious before you stop repeating an unconscious abuse cycle. So that's why I'm speaking them and making a recording so you can speak and participate in this. Now let's look at a very important ethical pattern, which is Ann Watts to Dane. So after Peter Sandhill abused me the first time and left me feeling confused about what love is and scared and tight, the next facilitator that all the facilitators recommended in glowing terms was Ann Watts. And so I started working with Ann Watts. And thankfully, she did not have erect genitals within the first 5 minutes of arriving. She did not open up and talk about looking for a young lover. She didn't encourage me to take drugs. She listened and told me I had a genius level of self-awareness, and told me she thought I was crazy when she first met me, but she's understanding how my mind works. And validated most of the insanity that I was seeing with women in the community. I would say, Ann, I tried to talk with this woman about this, and she wouldn't do that, and she wants this and this, and Ann would say things like, yeah, who knows why they're doing that, but that makes sense to me. And so Ann validated me, and this was very encouraging because I get attacked for thinking intelligently, is one of the better ways of describing it, because it's thinking anomalously. When you have cultish elements in a cult, they don't follow mathematics, they follow norms. And norms are very different than mathematics. Norms are things like, how are you? I'm fine. Mathematics are, how are you? And the response is, well, do you want a 1-minute answer, a 2-minute answer, a 3-hour answer? In which area do you want to focus on? And then you go into that and you rank things. That's mathematics. They have nothing to do with norms. And it's one of the reasons that one of the key decisions I look for in a partner is, are you trying to be happy and intelligent, or are you trying to be normal? Do you want a normal partner, or do you want an intelligent partner? Because they are not the same thing. And it's a very, very big distinction. The best sex of my life physically and emotionally came with a woman who had a brain, who was constantly, upset about the fact that I was not normal. Now, it was the best sex and heart connection of her life. But all she could think of is, that jacket, could you just wear a normal jacket? Could you just do this? Don't talk to my friends like that, And it wasn't about intelligence. That's not what the conversation was. It was all about normalcy. And so, I decided that the best sex of my life by a factor of 5. Meaning we'd have sex 3-4 times a day at about 300% higher intensity than almost anyone else in 100 lovers. And absolutely fabulous. But so much of our culture is based on the conscious mind and on communication. And I didn't want to feel that close to someone who would be so happy if I was someone else. Who would be so happy if, for example, I'm sure she would love it if I moved on as opposed to took the time to understand the underlying mathematics and bothered to expose how different I am by making an incredibly unnormally long video. Is it intelligent? Yes. If a single person understands ethical framework from this video, this is probably one of the most useful days I could spend in my entire life in terms of bringing value to the collective. That's how important this is on a mathematical level. Is it normal? No. No one's ever done this for me in my entire life. I like the mathematically intelligent and non-normal parts, and Anne backed me up in that a lot, which is a great gift. I feel a love for Anne Watts, and I feel loved by Anne Watts in that domain. As a result, I sent Anne Watts several customers, and I brought 5 relationship partners, many of them from High. I think 5 were from High, yeah. So of the 30 lovers I spent time with, 5 I brought to Anne, and I made being in relationship with them conditional on going to Anne. Meaning, I can see when faulty mathematics are in play, and I know how damaging they are to the person's life, which means they're going to be damaging to the relationship. The synergy of the relationship is limited to the weak points within the individuals. And so there are people that I'd say, I'd love to be in relationship with you, but you've got fuzzy math, and I will be in relationship with you on condition that we go to see Anne Watts and work on that math. And if the math can resolve, let's do it. If not, you've got a loyalty to an abusive dynamic, to an insanity, to something else other than this, other than the healthy part of you and the marriage. And I'm not going to fight with you. You've got to decide if you want to move in this direction. And some people left me because they didn't want to deal with that, which is why I find it so irritating, of course, listening to the endless stream that there are no good men, that men aren't spiritual, that men can't communicate, that blah, blah, blah. I've heard this my entire life by women who hate me because I think, because I communicate, because I'm direct, because I'm strongly interconnected with the mathematics that is spirit. You see, there's nothing more spiritual than the underlying mathematics out of which reality is created. There's no separation between that and spirit. There's a separation from cultural delusions and spirit and physics. There is no tension between physics and spirituality, between true sciences all fit together. Physics, geometry, relationship, these are sciences, and there's no, you can have spiritual sciences, you can have more esoteric sciences, but they move towards integrity, symmetry, efficiencies, and core mathematics. They are often directly at odds with religions, which are a cultural phenomena. A cult phenomena is a norm that is imposed by the dogma of normalcy. This is what we do because we do it, and we do it because it was done. And it was done because it was the right thing, and that's why we do it, because it was done. You've got a complete circle of nonsense. It's not referencing anything but itself. Well, any closed system like that is a dead system. Living systems reference everything else, and they connect to them, everything else. You can find the healthy cultures in the world by the cultures that are most interested in the rest of the world. The United States is not interested in the rest of the world. Healthy cultures around the world are interested in the United States and other parts of the world, which is why in Denmark I can find people who know more about the United States than many Americans, but they also know Denmark and they also know England. And certainly they know more about the United States than the United States knows about Denmark, to the United States' detriment. So a healthy culture references, well, I should say, a healthy pattern of relating is not just self-referencing. The geometry goes through the self and extends. Now, if you extend it, like, well, anyway. So Ann Watts is in a therapeutic relationship. Now, what's the trust-based dynamic here? Well, the contract with a therapist is that I'm here to help you and only here to help you. Now, why is that so implicit? Well, imagine a therapist saying, I'm here to mostly help you, but I have a little side gig. I've learned just how easy it is to manipulate my clients when I understand their biggest fears, their deepest desires. You have no idea just how easy it is to learn all kinds of things that are useful. And so I sell information on the side, on the black market, from time to time as a side gig. Now, don't get me wrong. I am here for you as my therapist, and you will improve in my therapy. But from time to time, I will take some of this relationship and I will influence you to do something that's good for me or one of my buddies or the black market, but not good for you. Now, would you go to that therapist? That's the question. And the answer is no. Because it is a profound honor to be let into the most vulnerable areas of the human psyche. Now you could say, well, why do that? Why let your therapist into the most vulnerable areas of the human psyche? Why not just talk about the weather or something? Because a therapist cannot provide the medicine, the healing, the restorative balance of symmetry to you in any meaningful way unless you trust them to give you access to the greatest vulnerabilities. Meaning, if you've got heart problems, but you don't trust your surgeon to access your heart, you can't fix the heart problems. Now, if you can't fix the heart problems, where are you going to go? Meaning, like, if you can't fix the problem, why would you pay a surgeon tens of thousands of dollars and pay health insurance and go to the hospital and lay there in a bed when you're not going to let them fix the problem? You wouldn't. If you're not going to fix the problem, the whole relationship is over, which means Anne doesn't make any money, which means Anne's just wasting time, which means everyone's wasting time. That's the dynamic in that situation. It's based on trust. Well, would you let a surgeon open your heart if they got an important call from their girlfriend about a hot date? So you're in open heart surgery. They've been waiting to fuck that girl for who knows how long. She's calling. Oh gosh, you're available right now. Okay. well, this patient would probably live. I think we could get away with it. It's like just anesthesiologist, pump up the anesthetic. I'm going to be going for an hour, right? Okay. Now, they've just increased the odds of dying 60%.